Given absolute freedom to race anywhere you choose, The Crew 2 is one of the most exciting racing concepts on PS4 and Xbox One consoles. For those who missed the original, it hands you a miniaturized version of the USA, from New York to San Francisco, remixed and remodeled for you to freely explore. 4 years on, the canvas is now even bigger for this sequel, and to help with that heightened scale, developer Ivory Tower adds boats and planes to an existing warehouse of supercars, giving you more ways to get from state to state. The sense of scale is often staggering, a supersized version of Forza Horizon if you like, and the idea is realised surprisingly well on all consoles. Of course, you can bypass all the game's open world roaming and just jump straight to set racing events on a 2D map. It's far more practical, but ultimately, it's hard not to experiment with the Crew 2's engine in a more freeform manner, just to see how far it goes. To demonstrate then, I've got this running on an Xbox One X, where the Babel engine at its core is upgraded to push out much improved draw distances compared to a regular Xbox One machine and even PS4 Pro. Consider it the best case on console, though even with that in mind, there are some serious pros and cons. First, there's the breadth of the terrain. Taken at a macro level, it's a thing to marvel at, and I had just as much fun experimenting with this side of the game as the actual racing. The engine gives you all the tools you need. Take a vehicle anywhere in the world, freeze the action and then zoom out and out until you see a full top-down view. It's like an in-game Google Earth, even letting you walk around to admire your collection of boats, planes and cars. But here's a curious bit of trivia. The orbital camera mechanic has similarities to Driver San Francisco, an unusual last-gen racer which let you detach from your vehicle in a similar way. Now this was developed by Ubisoft Reflections, who also worked on the original The Crew, and therefore you have to wonder if some ideas were carried over between the two projects. Either way, it's very impressive. Just as surprising is how the micro level detail holds up, driving through New York streets. Okay, you get a condensed greatest hits version of it here, inevitable given the magnitude of the city. But there's a lot of care put into the layout here, even if it is one part of a bigger piece. Race routes are more interesting as a result of this focus, and what would otherwise be an empty sprawl is, at least, lightly fleshed out with pedestrians and light traffic. Yes, stop the car, look closer, and it can start to feel barren and inactive, but in the context of the game's overarching scale, it's still an impressive feat. It's far from lifeless then, and it goes further. Engine features like a rolling day-night cycle and weather mix in seamlessly, adding rain and snow, each playing against the game's physically based lighting. All of which means at night, the game has a beautiful stretch of lamplights lining the highways, and at day, you can catch screen space effects like raindrops hitting the camera view. Now these ideas feature in the other heavyweights in the racing scene, Forza Horizon being an obvious comparison point. But here it only adds variety onto an already varied game, and creates some incidental beautiful moments. Rounding that off is an extensive use of physics simulation. Frustratingly, trees don't count here, and hitting them forces you to an abrupt standstill, but just about everything else on the road flies on impact. It's not unusual to see scenes of havoc unfold if you're behind the pack in a race and taking serious shortcuts to make up ground. Rocketing through the streets has you clashing with lampposts and roadworks, and I had a lot of fun flying low in biplanes to create a bizarre scene of carnage. There's an element of Grand Theft Auto's mischief to it all, especially once you introduce more ridiculous vehicles to the big city. A quick note here that I did notice some strange car physics on the first few races though. This may be tied to the netcode, but every time I landed this jump, hitting the ground would always cause the car's momentum to stop and then suddenly lurch forward. A glitch perhaps. Anyway, as ambitious as it is, there are limits. Ivory Tower's resources are spread thin while outside the major cities, leaving you a dull straight road flanked by pre-randomized terrain. It's more a novelty to travel highways, but it suspends an illusion that everything is part of a contiguous landmass. Of course you can travel as the crow flies in aircraft or take to rivers in a boat, but all told, it's just easier to warp to a location using the menus. The fact it's possible to travel manually, that there's an option at all, is a plus. It adds a context of freedom, even if you don't actually end up using it. Okay, let's talk comparisons. If the appeal of The Crew 2 is to render a massive open playing field, then the point of resolution plays a surprisingly big part in the experience. The higher the number the better, obviously, and for Xbox One X that native resolution is highest at 3200 by 1800. Admittedly, even at 1800p, it's a touch soft, and the use of temporal anti-aliasing adds obvious banding artifacts on edges. TAA is used on all formats though, and so the problem follows on PS4 Pro and base machines. PS4 Pro takes the next step down in resolution to around 2816 by 1584. Counting this one has proven tricky thanks to the game's per object motion blur and that TAA, but it's immediately obvious PS4 Pro takes an image quality hit next to Xbox One X. It's the first version I played, and definitely on a 4K TV, the window to the game's world suffers from more aliasing. It's still a big leap over the base PS4 of course, which runs at around 1728 by 972, seemingly cut down from the first game. At 972p, you get 90% on each axis of a 1080p output, and yes, that means more muddiness towards the distance. That's still a step up over a base Xbox One though, delivering the lowest resolution of 1600 by 900. And it does stack up. The Crew 2 invites you to look far into the horizon, and Xbox One X gives you the clearest window to it. The other major factor here is draw distance, where there's a logical scale to how far each console settings are pushed out, going from X to PS4 Pro, a regular PS4 and then a standard Xbox One in that order. There are small gradients in between. The range at which shadows and geometry are rendered shows up especially while flying, and you're bound to catch more pop-in on a base Xbox One. In comparison, the jump from the enhanced X version to the standard machine is stark, while the two PlayStation 4 machines sit in between these settings. All consoles benefit from the improved vegetation system, which is equally dense on each machine, and texture quality is identical between each format too. The shadow system is a sore point though. All consoles get atmospheric clouding and are beholden to a dynamic time of day, but the quality across the board is ultimately quite low, even on an Xbox One X. Expect to see lots of pixelation on the floor in exhibitions, especially so on the base systems. With that being said, in the blur of a high-speed race, it rarely stands out. Every console has to compromise on effects as well, like smoke trailing from planes. And surprisingly, even the all-powerful Xbox One X runs these at around half the game's overall resolution, though it looks worse overall on the other consoles. Again, it just adds up to give the Crew 2 a less than stellar presentation, sometimes blurry and at times with a flash of aliasing on edges. It's also hard to overlook the screen space reflection technique used across the game's lakes and rivers, a method that uses the camera's view to work out what should be mirrored on the water. Too often you'll see parts of the foreground image get mixed up and factored in, which can look a little odd. Whether it's image quality, draw distance or shadows, its clear cuts are made to create such a wide open space. The balance is effective though, taken from a distance. The Crew 2 is a victim of its ambition, the main issue being that it gives you total freedom to fly anywhere or look up close, which means you can see the stitching at the seams. When it all comes together it looks gorgeous, but on the ground I can't help but wonder if the settings could have been more adaptable. For example, perhaps it would have been possible to elevate shadow quality on a base PS4 when you're in an exhibition looking at your vehicles, while in a race that quality could be lowered. A quick word on frame rate. The console versions here run at 30 FPS with an adaptive VSync in place. In my experience playing the game's opening missions on all four machines, it's only been the standard Xbox One to flag any real issues. The adaptive VSync kicks in noticeably here, right at the top, letting the engine render incomplete frames if they fall out of a render budget of 33.3 milliseconds. But even with that safeguard, it's dropping frames to almost the mid-20s here. It's unfortunate for a base Xbox One, but improved on a base PS4, which suffers fewer drops, though still with some tearing. Otherwise, expect a much smoother, tear-free ride on the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro, and the Crew 2's ambition feels much better suited to these machines. In essence, Ivory Tower's sequel takes what we had in the original game and improves it in almost every way. Resolutions are lower on base systems, while sadly frame rates can struggle on Xbox One, but the trade-off is there in the overall engine improvements. It's a bigger world with more vegetation and atmospheric effects, and more ways to interact and explore it. The net result feels substantial, and while the focus veers more towards the Crew 2's wider breadth of detail, there's still plenty to admire up close. Needless to say, the console experience is best on Xbox One X, with quality tapering down to PS4 Pro, PS4 and then a regular Xbox One. but how much these consoles share and the scope of the world is a tribute to the game's design itself and the technology powering it. Anyway, that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this analysis, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell to get notifications as soon as a video lands. For the source file to this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in direct contact with me or the team, you can do exactly that on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.